Right. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Kerith.
Hi, everyone's just coming in. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. All right. Hi, Hey Young. All right. So we'll wait for everybody to start to sort of pop up. And I'll start with a few housekeeping things that I always say, which are please keep yourself on mute unless I ask you to unmute yourself. You can go into speaker mode in the upper right. I'm pointing to the right as if you can see my screen. In the upper right-hand corner, we are going to be talking about the fall releases. I'm sure people have a lot of questions. And I'm just going to start by asking some of our friends in Houston how things are going. So why don't, Mike, do you guys want to, Mayor family, do you guys want to unmute for a minute and tell us how things are in Texas with the onslaught of Laura and Marco? Is that what it is?
Sure. We are fine. If you're closer to the coast, Galveston is getting some, some heavier or high tides.
Okay.
They've had some storm surges coming in and some storm, just finger, what do they call them? Feeder bands of the storm. But it's really more east of us. It's right at the Texas-Louisiana border, and it's going right up the Sabine River. And it's going to be everybody that's to the east of that's going to get hit really hard. I mean, I'm guilty. I'm embarrassed to say this. I played golf this afternoon, so it was incredibly hot because we had incredible humidity today.
Oh, right.
But no, we're fine.
But we're north and west, so
yeah,
as
and it's
well
going
as
to
our
be
families are.
that
so.
track is going to go right up to north, like through through Alexandria, up into Arkansas, and head back to the east. Is what the current forecast is. But it is one of the biggest storms ever, and that whole area down there, Lake Charles, is only 20 feet above sea level.
Oh, right.
And they're talking about a 20-foot storm surge, and it's on the water. I mean, it's going to be devastating to that part of the world. And they've given this is not a survivable storm warning, which I've never heard them say that before.
I heard that too. So Alan's here. Yeah, Alan, you're also in Houston. What have you heard? Because I've never seen that unsurvivable storm either.
Yeah, because it's probably going to landfall at a Cat 5, maybe a strongest Cat 4, but they're talking about, if you could picture Louisiana's map and Shreveport, how far north that is. They're talking about by the time it gets to Shreveport on Thursday, it's still being a Category 1 hurricane. That is unheard of as well. So the storm surge where it comes on shore in Lake Charles and that area, as Mike said, about it, just 20 feet of water, and that's not survivable for anybody who's 5 feet tall to 6 feet tall.
Plus 150-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah, I think here in Houston, so Mike is right. I think we're expecting sustained tropical storm force winds, which is 45-ish miles an hour. That's going to cause some tree limb blowdown. That's going to cause some power outages. Hopefully not too much of either. And then we're 2 to 4 inches of rain. We're west of the Beltway, Mike, about a mile. So yeah.
Wow. So I guess that is. Go ahead, Mike.
We're up north, kind of in the Champions area.
Well, I guess that's the official segue into extreme weather, right? So I'm sure you've all read about Sonoma County and Lake County and Napa County and Santa Cruz, Monterey, the Santa Lucia Highlands. We can talk a little bit about the weather around here. I'm sure there will be questions from you. And I'm happy to answer them as honestly and as transparently as we can. But basically, the bottom line is it's still sort of too early to know in terms of wine. In terms of our home, the vineyards, we are very lucky. We've been totally out of harm's way. Much of what is burning is in the rugged northwest corner pocket of Healdsburg. It's largely underdeveloped and undeveloped terrain. It tends to be ridges. It's very rocky, which makes firefighting tough. The weather has been a lot cooler the last 3 or 4 days. The humidity has increased, and I think that's really helping CAL FIRE to wrap their arms around this. So do people have specific questions about the weather up here before we start? You guys can raise your hand, unmute. Nobody? All right. Well, good. Then I'm going to share my screen with you guys. And I am going to start with a picture of our house from just a few days ago, which I made sure to take when I stepped outside to show you guys these beautiful blue skies. So we're grateful for that, which reminded me to put up this picture. So of course, this is just to remind everybody how big Sonoma County is. So Sonoma County is just about 1 million acres. So it covers a lot of topography, which is why we can grow Pinot and Chardonnay and Syrah and Bordeaux varietals and Rhone varietals and Calatat. We have all these pockets of different wine grapes that grow well because we have pockets that are warmer and pockets that are cooler, pockets at elevation. And because of that, there's not one size fits all tagline for the weather and the fire of harvest around Harvest 2020. So the story is yet to be told. I think that we are prepared for harvesting in light of COVID and social distancing and being outside and keeping our crew and staff safe. And of course, having the fires was just another layer of complexity. I think winemakers are endlessly optimistic. So we're starting harvest tomorrow, and I'm optimistic we are going to be making some good wine. So there we go. All right, so let's go back and get into what we have coming down the pike. Because we have multiple varietals and multiple vintages, I wasn't really sure what one to start with. But I'll just point out, of course, that we have Chardonnay coming from sort of out right along this line in here between the Russian River and the Sonoma coast from the Heinz Vineyard. Of course, you can't see Santa Lucia Highlands. It's kind of down that away. And then we have the Rock Pile Zinfandel coming, and Torrey Hill, which is right here, sort of at the ridge between Russian River Valley and Chalk Hill. So I thought I'd start with the Chardonnay, with just sort of a reminder about sort of making Chardonnay and why Chardonnay is so much fun and why I picked this site specifically. So of course, Chardonnay broadly, it can be divided into sort of 3 very broad styles, right? There's sort of the fruity, unoaked. There is the which is one style. There's sort of the heavy, the toasty, buttery, luxurious Napa style, the style number 2. And then there's the more Burgundian style, which is built for ageability. It's fermented all in barrel, but not necessarily toasted. It's picked at a slightly lower brix. It tends to be more acid driven, which tends to lean towards that food friendly and age worthy style. And that was the style that inspires the Heinz Vineyard Chardonnay. So with that, let me go back to sharing the screen. So as I said, lots of batonage for mouthfeel, high acidity, love letter to Burgundy. Oh, that's the only slide I have. Okay, so in terms of the 2019 vintage, so that's really the only wine, the first wine that we're going to see from 2019 other than some rosé. So 2019, we had a few warm spells. And of course, we also had the terrible fires last year, which put us out of our house for over a month. All of the fruit for Brouillon was picked before the fires. In fact, in 2019, over 80% of the fruit in Sonoma County was picked before the fire incidents. So Sonoma County continues its track record for excellent wine, and I'm really excited about the 2019 vintage of Chardonnay, and I will tell you why. I feel like the 17 vintage, I was really able to capture that bright, zesty, citrus honeysuckle combination that you see in a lot of French Chardonnays in Burgundy. And it had a really linear, racy kind of profile. The 18, if you still have some around, is got a little bit more texture and a little bit more palate weight and fullness on the palate. And I think the 19 captures both. So one of the things I put up there was batonage. Does anybody know what batonage means? You can unmute and just shout it out. if you know. Go ahead, Mike. Batnage.
Stirring on the lees.
Yeah, stirring on the lees. And why do we do that? Anyone know? You can shout it out.
Texture,
Yeah,
complexity,
yeah,
flavor. all
yep,
of that.
yep. You got it. And what's that texture from? Anyone know?
The yeast. The
Uh-huh.
yeast in the barrel itself, whatever the vessel. If you're storing it, if it's done in wood, it's going to take on some of that from the barrel. But I think it's mainly the yeast, isn't it?
It is. It's mainly the yeast. Yeah. So batonnage is the French practice of stirring your barrel. And we have this metal device, le bâton, and it's like a large metal stick with a little propeller on the bottom. And we put it in the bung and we move it back and forth. And what it does is it agitates all of the yeast that are on the bottom and resuspends them into the wine. Because the key to making a Burgundian style Chardonnay is to ferment it in the barrel and keep it in the barrel on the gross lees for the life of the wine. And as you stir it up, those yeast disintegrate and they release all of the manoproteins that have been in the cell wall. And those are what can help create some of the fullness and texture that you get on the palate. So doing batonnage, number one, the first thing it does is it helps you get through secondary fermentation. So as you remember from chemistry, as I'm sure you do, we have primary fermentation, right, which is the conversion of sugar to ethanol to alcohol, followed by secondary fermentation, which is the conversion of malic acid to lactic acid. But I guess all you really need to know is that by the time primary fermentation is done, is sugar going to be high or low? Raise your thumbs up if sugar is going to be high at the end of fermentation. No, it's low, right? And alcohol at the end of fermentation, is alcohol going to be high or low? High, right? So that's sort of like a nutritional desert if you're a bacteria. There's just not that much left to eat. So one of the things that can help move secondary fermentation along is batonnage and encouraging those yeast to break down and release some of the nitrogen that those bacteria need to multiply to get through malolactic fermentation. But like I said, the other really nice part is the textural component. So we just bottled that 2019 Chardonnay, oh gosh, towards the end of July. So it's still pretty much a baby. But once I let it open up in the decanter and give it some time, it's really going to be a beautiful wine. So I'm really excited for it. We have a tiny bit of 18 left, maybe fewer than 10 cases, I think. So I'm excited to get the 19 into people's cellars, and hopefully they will give it some time before they open it up. All right, Chardonnay questions about the Chardonnay coming down the pike. Anyone? All right. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and we will talk about the Russian River. Share screen, share screen. There we go. There we go. All right. All right, so the Russian River Pinot Noir, it's the 2018 vintage, which as it happens was like a picture perfect vintage. For the most part in 2018, the weather was mild. You know, we had a nice long hang time, we had a few warm days, but we didn't have any of the extreme heat pushing us to harvest very quickly that we've had in years past. Degree days were close to average, if slightly lower, giving us a little bit of additional hang time. Of course, the 2017 crop was robust. 2018 was pretty big too, but I think a little bit more balanced. So it was a really, like I said, picture perfect growing season. One of the trends that we saw across California, across all varietals, was that it was a high acid year. In particular, it was a year with elevated acid and elevated malic acid, which is just sort of intellectually interesting. Of course, that malic acid gets converted to lactic acid. But it was a year where secondary fermentations did take longer than in years past because we were starting at a higher level. Is that an academic interest? It's part of the roundup that we do in terms of end of harvest roundup. So again, degree day accumulation, just about average, and the woody. So for those of you who've been drinking my wine a long time, You probably remember my talking about fermenting in oak tanks and using the woodies and using the mini-me's, which were like little tiny woodies. And I am a really big fan of incorporating fermentation in oak vessels when I can. So 2018 was a year for Torrey Hill where we had over a ton of fruit on the mighty Torrey Hill vineyard, which was great because it allowed me to play a little bit. So the fruit came into the winery and we're like, over a ton, that's so exciting. So we put some into a macro bin and we put, you know, around a ton of fruit into a wooden puncheon. Does anyone know what a puncheon is? So a puncheon is basically like, it's just a big barrel, right? So a typical aging barrel, the ones you see in all the pictures of the winery, those are called barriques. They hold between 225 and 228 liters. They're standard size. Puncheons come in 500, 600, and 800 liters. And I often use the 500 liter puncheons because I like them a lot. Okay, who can, so how should I phrase this Socratically? So when we use a traditional sized barrel, there's a certain amount of wine to a certain amount of surface area. Do you think that the oak impact is more pronounced in a small barrel or a big barrel? Who thinks it's more pronounced in a small barrel? Who thinks it's more pronounced in a big barrel? Okay, you guys are right. So the oak imprint tends to be more impactful in a small barrel. The reason the big barrels are nice is that I find that the oak integrates really, really smoothly. Just it has to do with the volume to surface area ratio. I just feel like the oak's a little bit softer and a little bit better integrated. So I do often like to incorporate 500 liter puncheons. And when they're neutral or when they get old, one thing you can do is take the head out. So now you have just an open container. And that's what we used for fermentation for part of the fruit for the Torrey Hill in the 2018 vintage. So that was really fun. And I also did a completely native fermentation in the woody, which is new for me, being risk averse. I tend to not like native fermentations because I feel like I can't control it as much, but it smelled delicious in my notes. So we have a share screen again because I think we have some fun woody pictures coming up. Oh, and there's Russian River. Again, just the adjectives we think about. A little bit about the Russian River Valley, right? You guys have all seen this slide. We have 5 neighborhoods. The Torrey Hill Vineyard sits in the easternmost part. The fog's a little bit less impactful here. We still tend to get fog in the morning, but we don't get as socked in as the western parts of the Russian River Valley. Oh, I guess we don't have the picture. So one of the tough things about fermenting in the woody tank is that it can get really, really hard to punch down the fruit. So I'm not going to give it away in case you've seen this slide, but I get help from my kids when it comes to punching down in the woody barrels. All right, so do we have questions about the Torrey Hill forthcoming?
Okay, I just have to ask.
Yeah.
What is a woody?
So the woody is just the name of the puncheon that I use for fermenting. So a woody is any wooden tank. So when I was making wine at McPhail, we had a really big wooden tank. It was really, really big, and it could hold 4 to 5 tons of fruit. So it was really big. And then we had some little tiny guys, and we called those the mini-me's. And now at Grand Cru, I use the 500 liter puncheons. So to me, a woody is just any wooden vessel for fermentation. Good question. Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
So I was just curious because there is less impact per liter per unit of time in the large puncheon than there would be in a smaller vessel where there's a higher contact between the wood and the wine. Do you need to leave it in the puncheon longer to get what you need?
No, that's a really good question. I actually like it because it has a softer impact. I like that it seems to integrate early, and working in the puncheon seems to be more respectful of the fruit. So you sort of get a beautiful integration between the wine and the oak influence earlier in the life of the wine. So it has more time to integrate as a cohesive sort of organoleptic whole. So I leave it in for the same amount of time. That's a really good question though. Other questions? All right, let's move on to the Sobranus. All right, so this was Sonoma County and Sobranus Vineyard Pinot Noir. So just to remind everybody, of course, this is the only fruit that I have that's not from Sonoma County. It sits about 3 to 4 hours south of Sonoma County, pending traffic. It sits over the ridge from the mountains, right over across from Monterey Bay. Monterey Bay really drives the terroir of the Santa Lucia Highlands. And that's really has to do with the Blue Grand Canyon. So sitting outside of Monterey Bay, it's exactly what it sounds like. The Blue Grand Canyon is a big canyon sitting underneath the Pacific Ocean, just off Monterey Bay. And because of this big cavern sitting in the Pacific, it drives a really cold jet of ocean air, of ocean water into Monterey Bay. And actually, I've been told that it is the coldest jet of Pacific water coming into California. And it's that impact of that cold water coming into the bay that drives the marine-driven cycle of the terroir of Santa Lucia Highlands, which of course gives you the fog in the morning and the wind in the afternoon. So I guess the really important things that make Santa Lucia Highlands special is the wind comes in at 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So it never gets as hot as it does in places like the Petaluma Gap. And when I say as hot, it's all relative, right? So in the Petaluma Gap, the sun heats up until 3 or 4 o'clock. At the peak of the day, the wind comes through. The difference in Santa Lucia Highlands is it's heating up and the wind comes through before you hit that peak of the day. See, another big difference with SLH is rainfall. It gets significantly less rainfall than Sonoma County. It's a much, much drier area. The diurnal variation in the day is smaller than in Sonoma County. The weather tends to be very, very regular there. It doesn't get as warm as it does up here in Sonoma. It doesn't get quite as cold. They don't have the frost issues that we do. It's just a smaller temperature band, which makes it a very special place to grow grapes because it has a very distinctive personality. Again, it's very small, 18 miles long. And of course, we're talking about the Sobranus vineyard. And we talked a lot about the wind just now. Okay, so, you know, the 2017 vintage for SLH sort of marks just around the 10-year anniversary of the vineyard. So my first fruit with SLH with Sobranus was 2009 or 10, I think. And it was planted, you know, 3 or 4 years before that. And, you know, when you start with a very young vineyard, it tends to be fruit forward and, you know, exuberant. And, you know, you have to wait for sometimes for higher bricks to get that flavor development. And starting in 2017 was really the first year where I remember saying, wow, this really has beautiful flavor development happening at lower bricks. So that was really exciting. And in preparation for this, I was looking back through my notes for 2017, and I had written most delicious fruit of the season when it came in. It was just tasting so good. The color was so beautiful. I'm really trying to avoid drinking wine that you don't have, but I do happen to have the Sobranus with me, and it's tasting delicious. I know that no one wants to watch me drink wine they don't have. But I'll tell you, it is wonderfully evocative of Santa Lucia Highlands. It has lovely fruit in addition to all of those savory notes that people love. So let me go back to the share screen. I'm hoping I have this funny picture in here. All right, let's see, hold on. Okay, so again, I really enjoy doing fermentations in a woody. And again, Lisa, this was a 500-liter puncheon. We took off the head and we put the fruit in there. We put in the whole cluster. And this is just a fermentation curve to show you how beautifully perfect, how the faculty at UC Davis would be so proud of me, right? So we have the sugar during the lag phase, and then we have the exponential phase, and then it goes dry. And that's the picture I was waiting for. So, and I'll bring this back up again. So especially with the Sobranas, where I did 100% whole cluster in the woody, it is really hard to punch down 100% whole cluster. So I invited Bruno to foot tread in the barrel. And luckily he has a great sense of humor. He got in there with his swim team Speedo. And I always say, the child labor is free, the snorkel is optional. So I'll put up that picture again because it's hilarious. He's always a good sport about letting me put these pictures of him. And it's pretty cold in that barrel room. Remember, this is cold soak. Bless his heart. He was a good sport about this. Which brings me to
Kerith,
Zinfandel. Yeah.
before you go on, do you always whole cluster Sobranas, or have you tried doing sorting, I mean, removing the stems and for part of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's usually a game day decision. So I do like to use stems with Sobranas for a number of reasons. Number one, I'll often ferment it in a wood tank if I have some kind of wood vessel available. And I feel like having the ligands from the stems working in concert with fermenting in a wood vessel really helps to build mid-palate early in the life of the wine. So that's really fun. I like the fact that when you add stems, it brings a savory kind of tea element to the wine and more of those savory notes, which I think work really well with Santa Lucia Highlands because it does tend to have a boldness and sort of a brambly fruit savory thing going on that I really like because it's so food friendly. But if you put in green stems, it's going to taste pretty lousy. So it tends to be a game day decision. In years where the stems look lignified and they're nice and tan and kind of crunchy, I'll throw some in. In years that it's not, where sort of the sugar and phenolic profile of the grape outpaces the ripening of the stems, I won't.
And
But
all on the same day usually?
oh yeah, it's all the same day. So sometimes if it's just going into tank, I might keep, if I have 10 bins and I'm doing 30% whole cluster, we just won't sort 3 of the bins. We'll just dump them in whole cluster and then sort the other 7 bins. And then with the woody, we just kept a bin out and we didn't sort it. We just dumped it into the woody and did all the rest destemmed in the tank. So yeah, it'll happen the same day. So, and lastly, onto the Zin. Where are we for time? Okay, so I won't keep you guys too long. So the Zinfandel is a new vineyard for us. It's still in Rockpile. It is the Glockner Turner Vineyard. It is further northwest on Rockpile Road than the vineyard we were using before. And the year that I started sampling this fruit from Glockner Turner, I was so excited all over again to make Zinfandel. Like the color was awesome, the flavor was awesome. It's always beautiful up in Rockpile. Again, this is just another beautifully scenic, stunning vineyard. And I just couldn't have been more excited to make this Zinfandel and share it with you. Because of the exposure in the sunshine, the fact that it is planted a little bit further west, it is a slightly plusher style of Zinfandel than some of the Zins in the past. But it is so luxurious and crowd pleasing. You guys are gonna love it. It has a beautiful acid backbone still, but it is plush. It is just so delicious. So I'm really excited for you guys to have this coming in the forthcoming release. So here's a picture of the vineyard. Of course, everybody knows that Sonoma County is the first grape growing county in the US to be 100% sustainable as a county. Even our little Torrey Hill Vineyard is certified sustainably farmed. And this just shows that it's sustainable. This is the entrance to the vineyard. And this is just, again, a beautiful picture of Rockpile, which again shows you the fog line out in the distance and the way that the vineyard sits above the fog line, above Lake Sonoma through all of these ridges. And it's just beautiful. And that's why Rockpile is such a fantastic place for Zinfandel. Zinfandel is thin-skinned, The bunches are big, they're prone to rot, they get these big shoulders. So sitting above the fog line is really, really helpful for having clean, healthy fruit coming in at harvest. That's one of the best things about rock pile. I think I have a couple more rock pile stats. Yep, there we go. So, 15,000 acres, 160 planted to vines, cooler than the Dry Creek Valley. Again, you get the wind influence because it's coastal. And the inversion layer, which we talked about, sitting above the fog line. So what makes the rock piles in the same as years past is, of course, that it's still from rock pile, which is not a very big area. Same yeast as years past. I found a yeast I like a lot. It's called RX60. Same barrel profile. So the oak comes from 2 different coopers, Nadalier and Radu. I've been using that combination with the Zinfandel for a lot of years now. So a lot about this Zinfandel is going to feel familiar, like a cozy sweater. But like I said, the intensity of hue is just, it's beautiful. The color is beautiful, which is exciting because it tends to be a poorly hued varietal. So I'm really excited for the forthcoming fall release. I think it's got great choices. I think the wines have ageability. I think that, some of them you can drink now, but not the Chardonnay because we just bottled it. But I think you guys are going to love the wines that are being offered. So thank you, and I'll open it up to any additional questions. No questions? No questions about the weather. I thought I would have to field all these questions about the fires. I'm happy I don't. Go ahead, Mike.
That's one question. The fires that are up in the Healdsburg, northwest of there, which direction is the wind blowing the smoke?
Well, it looks like it's blowing it north, but it really depends on the time of the day. So all over Sonoma County and probably Napa too, we will have periods of beautiful blue sky, and then we'll have periods where smoke, it comes in our direction, the air is gray. It tends to be clear at our house in the morning, and then it tends to get hazier, and then it clears out by the afternoon, which is sort of the typical wind profile that you get with all the coastal regions. In general, it seems to be blowing north.
And with that kind of wind profile and with the smoke, is there any real concern of smoke taint on the grapes, or is it not enough of an exposure to it?
I think we're going to have to see. I think it depends on your elevation. I think it depends how close you are to the actual fire, whether it's, fresh smoke or just haze. I think that there's vineyards that are physically closer to some of those fires, and I think it's going to be more of a concern for those vineyards. But I think it's just going to be wait and see. We know a lot more about smoke taint than we did in 2008 when I had smoke tainted wine in Anderson Valley, which is good. There's still a lot of things that we don't know. But I think for us and for a lot of my winemaking colleagues, we're going to follow the science. We're going to send in grapes to be tested. We're going to do mini fermentations, bench fermentations, and send things in to get tested if we're at all concerned. Sort of I don't want to say prevailing knowledge, sort of the ad hoc advice is you start to worry more after 10 days of prolonged intense smoke exposure. So, Sonoma County's rounding the corner of that 10-day mark. But because of the size of Sonoma and all of the nooks and crannies, I think it's really going to be vineyard dependent. So we will test. We've been in very transparent and close conversations with all of our growers. It also depends on, do you have Cabernet that's not going to be ripe for another 5.5 weeks? Or do you have Pinot Noir that you're going to pick tomorrow, like we do? So all of those things are going to factor in, and we just don't have a lot of answers yet. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. All right, people, other questions? All right, well, I got you guys just about right on time. Oh, go ahead.
You're going to open up allocations the 1st, right?
Yes. So on September 1st, look for the email in your inbox. So I think that's next Tuesday. And we're going to open everything up. And as I said, thank you everyone for your support. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting California wines and small wineries and family-owned wineries as we continue to navigate COVID, hurricanes, fires, you know, but all the good stuff ahead, right? Good stuff is coming. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate your support,
Thank you,
and
Kerith.
we will see you soon. Bye, everyone.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, thinking of everyone in Texas, too, of course. Be well, guys, and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, Mike.